There we go. I'm told it's showtime, and I'm told we are broadcasting live. So, welcome everyone on this Valentine's Day. I don't know if that's a.
Ooh.
Well, that was quick. Good show, everyone.
Here we are.
Hey, haven't had that one happen before. I suddenly got a message that says, "Looks like you unplugged your camera," and oh boy, look at that. That's not working. Anyway, I'm just going to keep talking while I figure this out. But I don't know if that's a worldwide holiday or not, Valentine's Day, but it is in the U.S. So welcome to this U.S. Valentine's Day edition. I think in the past, I've wound up canceling because, hey, we all have stuff to do on Valentine's Day. But we're going to sneak this one in. We'll keep it nice and short. And on that note, I am going to say, welcome to Nick McSpadden this month. And Nick, I got my camera back. Gosh, I have known you since way back in the Macworld days.
2013, I think we first met.
Probably. So it might have even been before that. I think by 2013, I had you speaking at MacTech conference.
Yeah, you're right.
I think so. I think we
one
already
of the old Mac IT conferences at Macworld.
Yeah, exactly. Which are always fun. And I think a few times during this show, I talk about the sort of the old guard and the new guard, and I think we are definitely the old guard in a lot of ways. But that means a lot of us suddenly find ourselves in the role of management, right? It's just part of the progress of what do you do in your career, and some people go deeper and deeper and deeper into the technical world and the technical ladder, and that's the thing that they enjoy. And then some people make the move to management, and which is also a craft and like really interesting in my perspective. So I wanted to chat with you about what it's like and how that works. So initially I'd love to hear a little bit about your initial transition from IC to manager, and you can use this time just to tell people who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Nick, obviously, and I've been a manager at Meta, which is Facebook, is now Meta, for about 3 years. I transitioned in 2020 from IC to manager. I've been at Meta for about 7 years now, and somewhat rare for a lot of tech companies. I've been on the same team since I started at Meta. I was a contractor initially for a year, converted to full time, joined the CPE team. I was a contractor for the CPE team as well, and now I'm a manager, one of the managers in the CPE team. The CPE team, since I started, we initially had 7 people. We're now at 45 total people across a much larger scope of what affects clients. Now CPE includes like client security, a VDI desktop team, as well as PC, Linux, Mac OS, and some foundational teams. And so I support 3 teams right now on CPE. I support the Mac OS team, the package infrastructure team, and the config management team. And so those last 2 make up kind of like the foundational glue that all the other platforms use. Basically, the problem for everybody is about the same. We want to do stuff on laptops. We want to get stuff from point A to point B. Sometimes it's packages, software, tools. Sometimes it's configurations, policies, auditory or regulatory requirements, things like that. So one way or the other, everybody has to solve the same basic thing. How do I do stuff on laptops effectively? And so, for me, having been a Mac admin for a long time, I can't let go of the Mac OS team. I have to stay close to that. That's it's kind of where I cut my teeth. That's where I kind of grew up, and I'll probably be like permanently like embedded in this space for as long as I'm working in the tech industry. But the growth of the config management team and package infra team as separate concepts has been an interesting one. It's something we scoped out. We used to have a broader core services team about a couple of years ago. We started out with just like one team whose responsibility was to help maintain services that allow the different platforms, Mac OS, Windows, et cetera, to be successful. And we realized that, when you support multiple platforms, even though ultimately you're still solving the same very large umbrella problem, installing software, deploying configs, the way that you go about solving those are very different for Mac OS and for Windows and for Linux. And there's a lot of vendors out there who try to abstract that uniqueness away into like, here's one pane of glass that manages everything you got. And I think if you talk to almost anybody in the MacAdmin community who uses one of those single pane of glass tools, they'll probably tell you about the same thing, that like they're all only so good. Like no vendor's ever going to solve 100% of your needs. And at Meta, we've got over 140,000 machines to worry about for computers, for laptops, desktops, et cetera. And the 80% isn't good enough for us. It's just not going to work to solve the problems that we have to solve. And of course, it's no secret, Meta's in the news a lot. I'm sure everybody has seen, Zuck's been in front of Congress more than once. Various executives have to talk to various regulatory bodies around the world. Facebook, Meta has a huge presence globally. So that means we're under a lot of regulatory scrutiny, and we have to make sure that we're compliant with all kinds of global requirements and regulations and governmental rules and things like that. So compliance and security are really like the two biggest focuses for us. So as an IC, when I started out, as an IC in CPE, the problems felt a lot smaller back in like 2015, 16, 17, 18. It was like, okay, we've got X number of Macs. Apple's throwing wrench after wrench after wrench at us, and you just got to keep rolling with it. The birth and sad death of imaging, Golden Master imaging was our first strategy. The migration to MDM-driven delivery, like to DEP and to Apple Business Manager became the required tools. The growth of MDM from this is a nice to have to a now this is a core requirement for being able to actually do things you want to do to meet your regulatory requirements for Mac OS. We kind of like, I went through all of that as an individual contributor. Around 2020, 2019, my own manager said, look, the Mac OS world that we've got, like we've spent a lot of time on Mac OS as a team. It's in pretty good shape. We need to spend some more time on the Windows side of things. Like we've got like 15 to 20,000 Windows machines at the time that just needed more love. And so I volunteered to lead the Windows initiative for a while. So I sort of pivoted to help solve some of the core problems we had there. And around 2019, I was like, look, I think I've run out of problems that I can solve by myself. I think I've hit the limit on like the problems that we need to solve now are now just bigger than what a single individual can accomplish in a reasonable time frame. I'd like to continue like focusing on solving some of the more fundamental problems across the org, across the space, the platform, and take on a larger scope. And that's, to me, like what the jump to management was. It was realizing and concluding that I wanted to go solve problems that required more people. It required more cross-functional work. It required more support across different parts of the company. And ultimately, it also meant I had to bring more people on to help in this space. And one of the best ways to help grow new people is to just step in and help mentor, to lead them, to provide opportunities for them to take on the work that you yourself used to be an expert at. So in order for us to grow, to accommodate the scale, like Meta at the time was going, like Facebook at the time was going to like a 30% year-over-year growth. It was the golden goose age for everybody in the tech industry. Tech was just exploding from 2017 to 2020. Everyone was just growing like crazy. There was money everywhere. We were hiring like mad, and a team of 7 people was not going to keep up with a 30% growth every year. So just had to bring on more new people on a regular basis, had to focus on solving bigger and bigger problems at a scale that we needed. And that's when I was like, I'd like to help people in this space. I'd like to help grow new people, to like introduce them to like the world of like working at scale, solving problems like this at scale. And my manager is like, look, I also support like 20 people right now, and I can't keep this up. I need help. So yeah, I took on, that was my first jump from IC to manager. I became what we called at the time like an M0, like we're just a side grade, same level from IC. Just now I'm taking on managing, focusing on that. And kind of to your question, like what the transition is like, it's not an easy one right away, because for one thing, you just can't wake up the next day and say, cool, I'm going to stop working on the stuff I was working on yesterday. You just can't do that at a large company or anywhere really. Like you just can't drop your projects, right? Somebody still has to deliver that work. You have to finish your stuff out. It takes a little bit of time to pull yourself away. And it took me probably at least a year before I could finally stop trying to solve problems myself. Just the compulsion of like, I know how to do this. I'll put up the diff. I'll go write the code to solve that. I'll go fix that bug. No. Your objective as a manager is to help someone else figure out how to prioritize that work, deliver according to expectations, meet the needs and solve the problem, and then move on, right? So that was a really strange muscle to have to start to build, is learning that like you have to just kind of let go of some of the things that you would have done yourself. And like I said, it took me a while. It took me about a year before I finally stopped trying to land any or like submit any code, and focusing really on like the larger initiatives. Like I said, what's the big scope problem we got to solve? Who do I need to go bring into the discussions to make sure that we're focused on solving these larger problems the right way? What are the partners we need to introduce? How do I grow new hires, young grads who are just joining for the first time? How do I grow them into a space where they can take on these skills, solve these problems, and seek out impact for themselves? And I like to think that I've done a decent job at it. We've grown the team 20 people since I started as a manager. And now I support, like I said, I support three teams. So it's been quite a journey, but it's been a fun one.
Okay, you answered everything. That wraps it up. Thanks. We're done. No, I mean, that was an excellent introduction, and that dove into a lot of interesting aspects of it. Rewind me, and when you first made the shift, the team was 7, or it was larger the first team that you were managing?
The first time, so when I first started managing, I managed directly 5 people.
Yeah, that's
so
a big jump.
At the time, we had like about 18 people total across CPE. So I took on 5 of them from my manager, who had previously been managing everybody. Like, as you know, again, we just grew like weeds at that point. We just hire like crazy, which is awesome. But of course, as I now know, managers taking on more and more ICs is a big challenge. Like it's a lot of work and time to manage a lot of people. People need things from you on a regular basis, and it just takes a lot of mental stamina to be able to handle all the stuff going on. And the more people you add, like the harder it gets. So, at the time, I didn't really understand how much of a difference it was going to make for my manager, just having someone take some of that heat. And so taking on 5 people initially, again, learning to focus on not what technical problem needs to be solved right now, but what strategic problem do we need to solve right now, right? The best advice I actually ever got was from another director in a different part of the company, who said, look, one of the things you just have to accept is that when you're a manager, especially as a manager who used to be an IC on this team, people are only going to do about 80% of what you would have done. They might do just a little bit differently than the way you would have solved it. And you have to be okay with that. You'll never have enough mental capacity to try to clone yourself onto every single person that you support. You just can't do it, right? So people are going to do things a little bit differently. They're going to solve things maybe just, not quite the way that you would have done, but they'll get there and they'll figure out the rest. And as long as you're focused on solving the right set of problems, you just have to kind of accept that that's how it's going to be. And that really kind of stuck with me, because I think that's in a lot of ways what changed how I focus on being a manager, which is that largely I'm not as much interested anymore in how engineers go engineer things. It's more that, okay, if we agree that this is the important goal to solve, we agree, generally speaking, on like how we're going to approach this problem, do it and see what happens, right? Like, okay, make the change, land the code, evaluate, make sure we have a good set of ways to measure our success here, that we have good metrics, we have observability, we understand what these things mean, we see what happens, and we keep on going. And that way, like looking forward becomes an effective strategy for being able to help people go do your engineering things. I trust you to go engineer as an engineer. If you have technical challenges, I can answer where I can. I'm happy to serve as a rubber duck, for example. One of the questions I get a lot actually from other people in the similar like IC to M journey is like, how much do you give up of your technical knowledge? And so I'll be the first to say, like, I'm not nearly as proficient as I used to be in terms of like, I could not, for example, today probably take on one of my existing IC's roles without a noticeable decrease in productivity. Like I would have to catch up, right? It's a muscle you have to flex, and over time it atrophies. But I like to stay involved enough that, okay, walk me through your solution to the problem. You're stuck. Tell me about how you want to go do this. And I can sit there and act as a rubber duck, asking the right questions. What if you do that? How does this work? Tell me why it doesn't work for you. Like give me the things that you think. And as a technical manager, that's a very effective strategy for like helping people get inspired to work their own ways through solutions, because honestly, the engineers that we hire, they're really talented people. They're really smart, and I just got to trust them to go do what they do best. So
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that, and I think you touched on it enough, but how technical do you have to be to manage a technical team, right? And I think there are varying degrees
yeah,
of
yeah.
answers there.
Absolutely, and I've seen a variety of different styles of managers, across Meta and in general in the industry in general. And I think that like you you can approach it any number of ways. I don't think it's a core requirement to be an expert in the space to be an effective manager in the space. It sort of depends on again how you want to approach the problems that your engineers bring you. So to a large degree, like I'm very familiar with the Mac OS space. I'm very familiar with the Mac OS underpinnings. I've been involved in it in a very large way. So when I talk to my Mac OS team about specific implementation details for how Apple implements this thing, how MDM works over here, I can stay involved at a very deep level, and I can have these deep and detailed technical conversations. I don't have that same level of confidence for Windows, for example. I just don't have that much experience, like in how Windows MSI packaging works, or when we talk about like configuration management and package infrastructure, we've built up all these, like these intermediary caching servers and our Nginx proxies and things like that. I'm just, again, not a wheelhouse I've spent as much time in. So I generally spend less time being directly involved in those discussions. I trust the engineers to work through the sets of problems. And my role is more of about facilitating. How do I make sure that you're able to get an answer to your question? How do I ensure that, like, if you hit a technical hurdle, what can I do to help you overcome that hurdle? Who can I connect you with? What resources do you need to help get past this block? Does this affect our timelines? Do we need to adjust our priorities? Things like that. So when I can be technically involved, I like to be, just because I like to keep my, it's my space. I like being involved in my space. When I'm not familiar, I really kind of step back and focus on those large scale strategy. And to me, that like being able to do kind of both things is, I like being able to do that. I don't know if I'd ever want to be a manager in a space where I had absolutely zero experience whatsoever. I feel like I'd probably be, I feel like I would personally just be less useful. But again, that's because I've been an engineer in this space for a really long time, and it just feels at home to me.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think my level of comfort is I need to be technical enough for people not to be able to lie to me, right?
Yeah,
to not
that's a
to not BS me, basically.
mhm,
Like maybe I can't go off and do it, but like I know enough about the thing that like I know if you're making stuff up.
mhm. Yeah,
um, I think you know one thing that is different when you get into management is an IC, you can be very protective of your time and you just want as much time to go heads down and be coding or solving your problem. Whereas in management, you have meetings all day because that's how you make progress is through meetings. And it's a total flip of how you use your time. Um, and I think a lot of ICs, look at their manager and like, oh, you're in meetings all day, whatever. You're just talking to people all day. And I, I don't know if people always understand the breadth of the work that a manager has to do. So I think you're probably responsible for your team's roadmap, strategy, budgeting, forecasting, team building, right? Perf reviews. Like, can you kind of go into like what that typical day or week might consist of that people might not realize that managers, sort of have?
yeah, no, absolutely. I think your point about ICs looking at managers and saying, "Oh, you're in meetings all day. You're not even here." Like how do you get anything done except for just talking all day? Is a very valid one, because I'm sure probably a lot of my ICs probably say that about me. That I spend, like, my calendar is just booked like a week in advance, period, all the time. Um, and I think that, like, when I was an IC, especially, the manager asking you for something is about to ruin your day. And a lot of what I do is I ruin IC's days. Hey, I know you're busy, but like I need some time to ask you some questions, or I need to know more about this. And so, okay, fine, I'll stop what I'm doing and go feed the manager. But what both the best part and the most interesting part of being a manager is how many invisible roadblocks that you remove from your ICs, right? That's kind of what my main function is I need to go talk to other managers, other teams. Okay, hey, this is our core priority right now. And on the horizon, I see that like this could have an effect. Like if we do this project, this will impact your team in some meaningful way, or maybe vice versa. Something that this other team is doing might impact our team at some point in the near, medium, or far future. How can we ensure that as managers we are aligned on how we want this to work out? Any constraints we might have? How can I make sure that what I want to avoid more than anything else is my engineers suddenly getting stuck up against a wall they can't overcome. The two things that are guaranteed to like ruin any individual's day, especially like IC's engineers, any engineer's day, is like, hey, stop everything you're doing and go do something else entirely. Like that's just such an inspiration killer when your autonomy is taken, when your priorities are shifted out from underneath you, and like, okay, cool. Doesn't matter how useful the work that you're doing right now is. I need you to stop and focus on this new priority. That kind of thrash is just terrible. So like that's my first goal, is to avoid that at all costs. And the second one is to make sure that like when people do work, it doesn't go to waste. I don't want you to spend a whole bunch of time working on a project or a goal or something that just has no value at the end, that like working on something that like the recipient then just walks away from, or they change their priorities and they don't care anymore. It just sucks to, as an engineer, especially if you're proud of the work that you do, to have your work just go nowhere. So like I really want to try to avoid priority shifting and just valueless busy work. So most of my time in meetings is spent like talking to other engineers, other XFN partners, cross-functional partners, other managers, just what's going to change in our space. How do we make sure that the work we're doing is going to is providing value to the customers who need it? How do we make sure that we don't have unexpected surprises coming by to like suddenly change everything? How do I know what's going to come down the pipe 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now that might change how we approach our priorities? So if I'm doing my job as a manager well, most of the engineers shouldn't have to stop doing what they do best. And so that's kind of like my general, like the way I look at like my calendar. I'm okay to sacrifice my calendar, talking to people all day, if the conversations that I have prevent other people from just having to be stuck in the mud, because that's the worst possible scenario for engineers.
Yeah. One of the things that you touched on there, around planning, I've worked for companies that are excellent at quarterly planning and sort of like yearly outlooks, and I've worked at companies that are just terrible at it. Like it's like, oh, the new quarter started. We should come up with our plans for what we're doing this quarter. And it's like, oh my God, this is just totally backward. I presume, Meta's pretty good at that, right?
I mean, again, like as a huge company, it changes a lot year to year, quarter to quarter, and team to team, and org to org, right? So, I couldn't say definitively that like across the whole company, we all meet this great standard of like very precise planning, because it's just not true for the wide company that it is. What I will say is that we inherently budget. Like I insist, like we budget in 30% of the year for wash time. We don't know what's going to come down the pipe. We have no way of knowing what's going to be asked of us. Anytime an executive ends up in front of Congress or some regulatory body, we get work to do one way or the other, right? Like almost every major event that happens globally that affects like that, when Meta ends up in the headlines, one way or the other has a way of trickling down to laptops. Laptops are always going to be like the intersection point of employees and like regulatory and security policy, because it's the way that people interface with their jobs for the most part at tech companies. They do it through their laptops. So almost everything that happens involves us in some very peripheral way. So I just expect that 30% of the year, not usually all at once, but like in small chunks, is just going to be taken up by stuff we can never possibly predict. And so as long, now we actually put that into our roadmap budget. We explicitly say, we're only going to plan out like 7 or 8 months worth of work for a whole year, because 3 or 4 of those months are going to be taken by things that no one has even no one even has a glimmer of an idea of what this problem looks like yet. And pretty consistently, that's been a good strategy for us, just because, like, again, like I said, anything happens, rules change, laws change, security events happen, like hacks happen, leaks happen, days, 0 days come out that require us to pivot and shift, and now adopt a new strategy for approaching a problem that didn't exist 6 months ago. So being flexible becomes a really defining characteristic for CPE success. So we do try to plan large buckets of problems now. We try to figure out, like, okay, here's the general area we want to fix. We want to make sure that like our core foundational config management tool, Chef, hits this reliability metric, over a certain time. We see, like, this is the top set of errors. We're going to go tackle those. Like, that's a pretty easy thing to have on the roadmap because it's kind of a general problem. But I also want to make sure that we have time, like, hey, we're actually introducing a new platform, or we're actually pivoting to look at, like a new problem space. Can I devote some of my engineers' time to onboarding and abstracting out this set of problems, in the configuration management general umbrella? And so as long as we're able to be flexible with our planning to the point where people don't end up, again, with like sudden priority thrash, I think we're doing all right.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It's like, I mean, you're an ops team, right? So time will be taken up with operations, like just basic operations.
Yep.
And that's an interesting way just to, like, 30% of the year, like, that's we're doing operations, right? Like these sort of
Got to keep the
like,
lights on.
yeah, but it's, I mean, yes, to plan for operations, but at the same time, it is an interesting metric to, like, you have project work and then you have unplanned work, and that's the whole problem with unplanned work, right? You just don't know
Right.
where
Yeah.
it's going to show up and when and what it's going to disrupt. So you mentioned different teams might do planning differently. I'm curious about how, like, I'm presuming there's some much higher level, like, here are our company goals, and how
Mhm.
your team fits into backing those.
Yeah. So that's very common. So, like, we're part of the enterprise infrastructure and security org, and that involves almost all of, like, the corporate technical side. Like, a lot of ways, a lot of places would probably traditionally call that, like, the IT organization.
Yeah.
But like we support the business, not the product, but the business. So,
Yeah.
like everything from recruiting to corporate infrastructure to network, all that. That's all part of, like, the corporate engineering portion, and we're peripherally part of that. So they set a set of goals for the orgs, about, we want to hit these top line values. We want to solve these sets of problems. One ongoing one, for example, that I think everybody is probably familiar with, is like vulnerability management. Like we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on vulnerability counts across all of our surfaces, and we're tackling known vulnerability problems. We're looking at security compliance issues, things like that. Like, those are, very common general things that I think a lot of large companies are probably very familiar with. So they generally publish their top line goals, and then we look at our roadmap, like, what's important to us. How's the work that we're doing going to help impact or move along these top line goals? And a lot of times the top line goals are general enough that this isn't really a big struggle, right? Things like, we have a reliability initiative, we have, efficiency initiatives. Okay, we're making improvements in our foundational infrastructure that automatically qualify, just by nature of them, as efficiency improvements. Or, like, when we spend a whole quarter doing a sprint devoted to knocking out, like, the top 10 errors that we see on our dashboard, like, that's already inherently reliability improvements. So it's not usually very difficult for us to map our P0 projects to, like, direct company-wide or org-wide goals. So as long as they're, like, sufficiently general, we're usually in good shape.
Okay, that makes sense. I did have a question in the back of my mind, and I think you just gave me a peek into the answer. But as we've seen IT go from sort of like, we add accounts to servers, all the way up through DevOps, where we're writing and
Mhm.
committing code into a repo and blah blah blah. I've definitely seen more and more sort of like developer frameworks pop up around IT. It's like, oh, we're using Agile, or we're using
Mhm.
some sort of methodology, and I don't know. I've seen those fail miserably, sort of, when it comes to DevOps, because it's not like, you don't need a 2-week sprint cycle. Like, yes,
Mhm.
as a team, you need to check in, and maybe daily stand-ups are useful and you can make them work for your team, but like the 2 week sprint cycle to put out releases
Mhm.
of a single product usually doesn't map quite onto an IT or a DevOps team.
Yeah. I look at Apple's yearly release schedule for Mac, like for operating systems in general, and I will say that's what gives me a job. That's what gives a lot of us jobs. So, like, on one hand, thank you, Apple, for the constant mess created by your yearly release cycle. But the yearly release cycle for Apple is just constantly fraught with peril, discovery, investigations. Hey, this thing that we all have been using and relying upon that hasn't changed fundamentally in 10 years is now completely different. And let's figure out how this affects your environment, right? So I see the effect that like this marketing driven release process has on the infrastructure and the supporting tools and like just like the product they deliver, like looking at Mac OS. And for me, it's like I would not actually want to have a fixed schedule like that, where I like you have 2 weeks to solve this goal. Like it's terrible. That kind of pressure. You know what? Like I said earlier, like flexibility is so much more rewarding for me. I think like be like again, as you said, we are essentially operations based. Like we have to be able to respond to things that we can't predict. Vendors will change. Microsoft will make new changes on a regular basis. Apple makes changes on a regular basis. All of our vendor platforms, Chrome browser, Safari, Edge, like all like we use all these big surfaces that we have no control over. These are giant black holes in a lot of ways. And we just have to be able to take whatever changes happen there and just deal with it and make sure that like we are able to adjust our own workflows and internal processes so that people can remain productive and effective in their own jobs, right? Our job as CPE is to make sure that everybody else can do their jobs and as efficiently as possible. That's our core mission. I need to make sure that whatever else happens to us, whatever Apple does, someone can pick up their laptop and go hire new recruits, can go like work with clients, sell ads, make changes to the website, things like that. So have like structured ways that like all these different structured ways of approaching agile, scrum, and like the sprint methodology and OKRs. They're different ways of kind of like approaching how you structure business wide problem solving. One of the things I really like about the team the teams I support, like in being on CPE, is that again, I don't want to say we're immune to it, but like we're largely left alone from that sort of thing. No one expects CPE to produce a product. We don't produce a product. We produce an invisible infrastructure. The laptop just has to work. And like no one, like there's almost no way to quantify exactly what that means, but everybody knows when it's not. Everybody knows when you're not hitting that goal of your laptop working. When you can pick up your laptop and just get into your job and do your job function, people are happy. When it doesn't work, obviously they're very unhappy. That's when they go to help desk, or that's when all the complaints start. So we don't really have any easy way of saying yes, we're doing it, but we have an easy way of saying no, we're not doing it right. Everybody else has an easy way of saying no, you're not doing it right. So no one's ever asked us to say, hey, on a 2-week schedule, you got to show us, exactly what metric you've improved, because it doesn't really make sense at a lot of times. Like you can look at it in different ways, and there's definitely parts of our infrastructure services that would qualify as having valuable metrics we should observe and measure improvement of over time. But for the most part, we are probably the best people who understand what we need to do to improve our own services.
Mm-hmm.
And people who aren't familiar with the space probably don't have as much of that context. And so as long as internally, like again, we're focusing on solving the right problems for our customers, that our partners are satisfied that they're getting the output they want from us, flexibility makes this much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to dig into there, but I did have another question that I wanted to sort of jump to. You called your team, or at least the umbrella team, before enterprise infrastructure and security. And I did want to ask about that, because I definitely know I hear from IT admins sort of everywhere, not just in the Mac space, but a big complaint is always like, security. My security team's always bugging me. My security team is always like, asking us to patch this thing quickly, or whatever. And in my opinion, security is the main driver of IT work. And
Mhm.
if you didn't care about security, you wouldn't need an IT team. you'd need a help desk, right? To like, oh, I spilled coffee on my laptop. Hey, we'll get you a new one. Oh, I can't print. Great, we can help you. But if you didn't care about security, you'd hand people a laptop and say, hey, have fun, go do your
Yeah.
thing, right? Like log into all the don't have a password. We don't care, right? So security is really the main driver. So it's interesting to see, you call out that they're so closely paired.
Yeah, without a doubt, just like you said, security is like one of our core partners isn't even the right word. Partners is like a word used to describe like two teams that work next to each other on a regular basis. It's like security and the needs around security are what largely drive decision making around like what our core priorities actually are. A lot of the services that CP provides are exactly what you just described, so that we can enforce security and auditory compliance requirements, right? Why do we need Chef? We use Chef to do things on computers. We use Chef across Mac OS, Windows, and Linux. We have for years. You can go on YouTube and see all kinds of talks from Mike Dodge and me and the people on CPE over the years talking about how we use Chef to manage our computers. Why? Because we have to be able to do things on laptops in response to security needs. We have to be able to enforce certain requirements. Like we expect everyone to have file vault turned on as a kind of a very basic, very obvious, and like Mac OS requirement. And we just got to make sure those things happen. Why? Because if we don't, someone the FTC comes over and says, hey, guess what? We're going to have a fun conversation about how much money you owe us for failing to meet your federal requirements. So security becomes, security is a really big, broad word. And I think, like, as you said, a lot of people like in our line of work probably look at like this big black hole of security and go, like this is a scary concept. But really, like we have actually a much smaller like core number of key things that we have to focus on. One, like, can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we were compliant with requirements at any given point in time? That you take any spot check, any laptop that any specific date, how many machines did or didn't meet our federal requirement to have encryption turned on, or turn on this feature or that thing, that sort of thing. So observability and compliance are like the big drivers for why we even have these foundations in the first place. Package infrastructure became a thing largely in response to like the need to handle vulnerabilities, right? Like everyone has kind of realized, and this is probably true all along, but we've realized more and more now in the last couple of years that like endpoints, especially now that everyone went remote, laptops really are the weakest link in the chain for almost everybody now. I mean, broad network security and like large scale management of DDoS attacks and things like that. Those are those what make the headlines when you see like Cloudflare just stopped the world's largest DDoS attack just recently, kind of things like that. That makes fun news in tech headlines. But reality is that phishing, spear phishing, and social engineering and laptop compromise really are actually much deadlier surfaces for a lot of companies. I mean, it happens all the time. An unencrypted laptop gets left in a car and is then stolen. Or like someone social engineers their way into accessing like full administrative control over directory services, or worse, user data, product data, trade secrets. So laptops, now that once everyone, once COVID hit and everyone started working at home, laptops really became the focal point for, hey, we got to make sure we're not letting anybody else use a laptop to get with the things they need from the rest of the surfaces in the company. And that really kind of pushed forward, hey, we got to make sure we don't have exploitable vulnerabilities. We're keeping these things compliant, not just for compliance for the federal requirements, but also like security policy has to be defined in a way that makes sure that we're protecting ourselves from ourselves. We can't let any one single compromised laptop break down the whole chain. We got to make sure there's no lateral movement happening across these boundaries from the corp to the prod boundary. We got to make sure we keep people away from user data at all costs. That is core to Meta's mission. User data is the gold that powers Meta. We have to protect it. So we have to put barrier after barrier in between laptops and user data to make sure that there's no chance those things ever, get leaked. So, partners isn't the right word. Security is the motivation behind why CPE has to exist. And a lot of our operations work is about ensuring we're building the right tools, the right infrastructure, the right surfaces to make that security policy reasonable and effective.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with all of that. I do want to shift back to some of the management work, and early on when you made that shift, um, like I think, like I mentioned up front, like management really is people management, right? It's its
Mhm.
own craft. There's a lot to take on, and like you're suddenly responsible for these people that report to you. How did you learn? Books, mentors at work, mentors outside work? Like how does someone like now suddenly thrust into that role learn what to do, learn how to be a manager?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm personally very happy that like Meta in general, has a lot of resources for helping managers become good managers. And we also had a very clearly defined set of behaviors. Like at the time it was like the 8 core manager behaviors we want to see, and that's how managers are evaluated. And so publishing this ahead of time, like there's a whole PDF you can read about like here's what we want managers to do in terms of like how they show care for people, how they focus on the right projects and impact, how they establish relationships and partnerships. And so you know, the company provides guidance ahead of time. Like, here's what we expect from you. And the hardest part of the transition for me is like pivoting from here's how I think about success as an individual, which is about projects and execution, and like taking on large scope initiatives, into thinking about how do I make sure we're establishing the right relationships to grow people into places where they can be successful like that. There's a couple different like books out there that people have recommended to me. I've read less than half of them. I'm not gonna lie. There's some kind of like key things I thought were particularly useful. Having your own manager be able to provide you a lot of like personal examples and your own experience of like things that worked well, and also telling you about the things that didn't work well. One of the best parts of becoming manager for myself was like when my manager then confided in me, here's the places where I as a manager felt like I did this well, and things that I actually felt like I didn't do well. And that kind of gives you some insight as a new budding manager, like, oh, if my own manager thinks that this didn't handle well, like, and here's how I understood the situation to happen. Like, you start to kind of build up a little bit of experience from somebody who has been through it. And my manager is a very experienced manager who's been around for a decade. So having a solid model, a role model, is a good one. I also had another manager act as kind of as a mentor for me, like completely unrelated to our team, just chatting through stuff. And mostly he was my rubber duck, right? Just just for rubber duck engineers, you work through a problem. I would describe him, hey, I'm having this situation. I don't know how to approach. Here's a bad relationship I have with this team. Like we have a contentious relationship. They don't like what we're doing. We don't like what they're doing. Or these two engineers can't talk to each other anymore because they just keep talking past each other. How do I resolve interpersonal conflict or strategic planning problems? Things like that. And just having someone to bounce it off became a really effective tool for just like helping you figure out how to work through stuff. The number one thing for me, I think that like helps me be effective though, is this is something that I really had to learn to do that I wasn't used to doing as an IC, is like actually like journaling, literally like journaling the day or the week. Like, here's what I've encountered. Here's the problem I'm trying to juggle right now. I actually had a Google Doc that was called my juggling act. And like, here are all the things I have in the air. This is what I think is glass. This is rubber. It's okay if the rubber things, if I drop them and they bounce, right? Like, no big problem. This is a glass ball and I cannot let this drop. If this drops, we have a big problem. And just like every day we just, try to change around, like, here's what's currently glass, here's what's currently rubber, here's what's expected of me, here's the problems that I'm encountering day by day. Like, keeping a running list of that helps me just start to understand the scope of how many things I had to be involved in and how many people I had to like check in on. Like, okay, this relationship seems like it's getting better. I got to follow up next week and really make sure like we're tying it off, right? Like, you can't just leave things anymore. As an IC, your problems are largely about how do I execute this project or this goal. Most of the problems you face are engineering problems when you're an engineer. But as a people manager, it's not like, landing the code isn't enough. You can't just like land the diff and walk away. You got to really like follow through. Did you get what you need? Are you satisfied by the outcome of this relationship that we established? Like, do you feel like you're getting what you need from our team, from the people involved? Cool. Can we follow up again in the quarter, in a month, et cetera? It's just the constant need to like keep track of these little tiny conversations. I did way more note taking as a manager than I ever did as an IC. I went through just piles of notebooks in my first 2 years as a manager. Now I'm a little bit better at understanding like what requires, like you build experience of like, this is actually what requires taking notes on. This is just something I can just kind of keep offhand. But there's just so many details and conversations you just forget if you don't keep track of them. So for me, writing became like my best tool for just understanding how to get the most out of the people I was working with.
Wow. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And here I thought we were going to burn through this meeting today and wrap it up kind of early, but this has been a masterclass, Nick. Thank you so much. But we are at 45 minutes. I want to open it up for questions. If anyone here has questions to ask Nick.
Hey, Nick. So with all those notes that you took, how did you revisit those notes?
Yeah, so I actually have like a specific like note-taking strategy, and I feel like there was a blog post about this many years back. I have to go back and dig up about like what your notes should mean to you and how to take them effectively. And essentially, like the system I came up with is like 3 shapes: triangles, circles, and boxes. And like triangle was like, this is going to require your attention really like now and more soon. Go back. So like I literally like flip back through my book, look for the triangles and rewrite them on the next day. Here's the next triangle I got to follow up on, right? Like this is like I cannot let this one go. Boxes were like, hey, at some point in the future, we got to figure out like a solution. We got to answer this question. It's a kind of a lingering background question that someone's going to want an answer for someday. So like, don't drop it, but like, this isn't going to drop everything and deal with it. And then circles were like, these are people I should really make sure I'm talking to or following up with, like on a people related thing. Like, are you happy with the outcome of that last conversation? Do you feel like you've addressed your problem? Are you still blocked on what you're trying to do? So just having like these simple shapes, because like I'm not gonna sit there and read all my old notes like that. Like this is not gonna happen, right? But there have been actual studies showing that taking physical written notes helps commit things to memory more effectively than just talking or even just typing it. So for me, the act of taking notes wasn't really about retaining the information. It wasn't about having a written record. It's more about getting my brain to process the things that I'm thinking about and then bucketing them, triangle, square, like circle, into like, here's the things I got to be aware of. It made it much easier to reference the notes later on. Like, okay, next week, did I take care of all the triangles? Scratch them out. Cool. This one's done. This one's done. This one's done. And just, for some people they use sticky notes. For some people they like my wife is a big fan of sticky notes. She's just got them all around the monitor. Some people everybody has different strategies for how they want to retain or track their information. Like, go with whatever works for you. But for me, just like a physical notebook where I write things down. That just harkens back to my grade school days. Doesn't matter. Like, we were first learning to type. We had typing classes when I was in elementary school. Like it was kind of a new thing still. And it didn't matter if you were a good typist or not. You still had to turn in a handwritten essay at the end of the end of the year. So just I got used to, as a kid, writing became the way that I remembered how to do things, and I've carried that with me ever since. So for me, still like writing stuff down and structuring it in a way that makes it easy to recall why it was meaningful. That kind of became like my key for using notes effectively.
I think there have been studies around that as well, right? That like writing in a classroom, because I know, my kids have progressed through, elementary and middle school and high school, and, following them all those years and going in and seeing their classes and talking to their teachers. We've seen things go from, hey, buy this kind of notebook and you're going to write notes, to, PowerPoint presentations being shown, and then the teacher just kind of hands out those notes, and you don't have the same memory retention as if you had to write it yourself in a way that you understand, right? Like, you've interpreted this thing and you're going to write it down in a way that makes sense to you. So yeah, I agree. I do the same thing, physical notebooks a lot. And I, when we were all in offices more, I remember people would comment like, oh, here he is with his notebook, like, yeah, damn right. Like, this is getting written down. And I had a similar system. I didn't use triangles and squares and whatnot, but I had like symbols that I could just kind of quickly scan for and know that, like, yes, this was a thing that I need to go back to. So yeah, that's great. In the comments, Damien mentioned starting to use a Rocketbook, and that's still handwritten notes but digitized. So that's an interesting middle ground. Like you're not using
Yeah.
physical paper, but it is interesting though because I think there still is something about the physicalness of the notebook. To me, it's similar to reading. Like I know probably about 10 years ago, I went on this rampage at home around like no more physical media, right? Like I'm getting books on the Kindle and I'm buying movies digitally, not DVD or Blu-ray or anything, and music and no CDs. It's all gonna be I'm gonna rip all my CDs and streaming services. And the only one I've gone back on is books. I do not do electronic books anymore. I buy physical books because there's definitely something about not only the tactile sensation, but like knowing how far you are through the book. And like, my brain remembers like, oh, I want to go, like, particularly maybe not a fiction, a work of fiction, but like a technical book. I'll know immediately, like, oh, that was last chapter, or I can very quickly kind of get back and forth to things in a way that I can't with digital notes. But again, to each their own, right? Whatever works for you.
Yeah, I actually briefly tried using, oh man, what was it? I think like when I got my first like tablet, I think I tried using OneNote with handwritten notes and like its OCR. The problem is like it was good. It did a good job like taking my handwritten notes and turning that into actual text. But the thing is, the biggest advantage that you've both mentioned, is like easily flipping back a few pages to see what you wrote before. There is no experience I could recreate through any digital OCR or like digital tablet that would be as efficient and as effective as just flipping back a few pages. I simply could not get access to my notes fast enough through the interface of OneNote, picking the chapter, picking the page or the date. Like the amount of taps or clicks it took me to get somewhere that I wanted to go. The ability to instantly access your previous information is one of the best perks of a notebook. Like you flip back, oh yeah, there it is. And that instant recall to me has been a huge benefit. And I've never been able to recreate exactly that efficient kind of a recall on any of the tools I've used so far. Maybe they've gotten better in the years since. I haven't really tried since, but personally, like I agree, like it just didn't work for me to try to digitize and OCR and recover that way. It just became too difficult.
I think there's one other aspect, and maybe it's just me, but there's something about that notebook being dedicated to that task. And it's just sort of like ever present for me. Whereas if I'm keeping notes like to-dos or things in a physical file or a to-do app, or, I tried to use what's the Google Tasks. It's built into Gmail, right? Like as soon as any of those windows get closed, out of sight, out of mind, right? Like I just don't go back to it, and like I forget, and like a week later I'll like, oh yeah, let me check that thing. Oh my gosh, there were all these things I was supposed to do. So like the physical notebook, like it's just there, it's ever present. I can't escape it. I can't close it and kind of forget about it.
I wonder how generational this is. I wonder if we're all from the same generation, essentially, probably within 5 years of each other, and I wonder. I have some younger technicians working under me, and they don't take handwritten notes. They don't know how. And I wonder, is what we're talking about simply a reflection of our generation? And
probably I'll ask you that.
And is the next generation able to learn in the same way or to the same degree as we did? With pencil and paper, pen and paper. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I wonder from a pedagogical point of view, what is it? Is this just a reflection of our generation, or is there actually a sea change happening in how people are learning? Now, there's some fascinating research being done on brain science and screen time, and the lack of handwriting and the increase in typing.
What I will say, if you don't want me soapboxing for a moment, is that one kind of thing I'm trying to insist on now for my meetings, especially, is that I really don't want people to bring devices as much as we can avoid it to meetings. While I'm in a meeting with somebody face to face, you have my undivided attention. And the notebook is really effective for this because it means that like I can still retain things without interrupting the flow of our FaceTime with each other. When you're in a meeting and everybody has a laptop, there's a million, and trust me, at Meta, I know this more than many. There's a million ways to have things ask for your attention, between work chat pings and, internal group posts and emails and, like your diffs landing, here's a, new code to review, things like there's a million different ways to get distracted by stuff. And, everybody tries to find ways to minimize distraction when they want to focus, but like, it's just too easy to give in to that sweet siren call of something that wants your attention when you've got a device in front of you. And, even for my younger people who, may be more attuned to like taking notes by typing, the lack of presence when someone is focused entirely on their device and not, like on the flow of conversation, to me, it's a visceral and physical difference. And so like for me, like that notebook is also like a sign of my commitment that like I'm here and I'm here to talk to you. If I wasn't here to talk to you, I wouldn't have come to this meeting, right? So like for me, it's like this is my covenant to you that you have my time, will make it worthwhile, and I guarantee like we'll get good results out of it this way. So that's my personal soapbox on that.
I definitely agree with that, but and that's what I was insisting on when I was in offices with people. And I think that's a big difference. Now, like here we are, the five of us, right? Remote, yeah. I'm looking at a screen. Now I have do not disturb on, whatever, but there could be certainly things on this screen popping up, demanding my attention.
Yeah,
right?
Well, that's very true now.
So it is a little different now with so many people working remotely, or it's interesting. I mean, all good questions, but I agree with you, particularly in a smaller meeting or one-on-one, when you're physically there with someone, like just even like the laptop and the screen being something that's between the two of you is like this sort of like barrier, right? Like whether that's the intention or not. So yeah, I agree. The notebook just lays flat on the table, and yeah, it's not in your way. We usually wrap up talking about conferences. I'm just going to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You said, you'll find all these talks from Facebook people online about these subjects. Any conferences coming up for you and or your team that we should be looking out for?
We're aiming to all be present at Mac DevOps YVR.
Oh, nice.
In June. So, we'll definitely have a company presence there. I'm going to try to bring the entire team, actually, myself included. So I'm actually really excited. It's the first time we've had a conference since 2020 in person, right? So we all had a lot of fun in 2019, and then everything stopped at that point. So it'll be really exciting to kind of go back to, the best part of a conference, as much as the speaker content for conferences is, it's great. It's what we're all there for. But honestly, the most compelling part of every conference for me is just being able to talk to people, casual conversations that turn into really interesting, discussions on how we're approaching problems. And sometimes you hear about somebody solving a problem whether you never even thought of. And like those hallway track conversations are just the unbeatable value that you just can't get from watching a presentation on a stream. And so I'm super excited to come back to in-person conferences again. So a little unfortunate, of course, this is the year where like the whole market's squeezing and everyone has less money now. And so, it's a little bit, travel is not as easy as it used to be, but, I'm excited that we got signed off to attend YVR. So we'll definitely be present for that. Awesome.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I can't wait to get back to conferences in person. And it's interesting. Mac DevOps YVR, great conference. And one of the greatest things about it is that it's small and very sort of tight knit. And if I remember correctly, Matt is running it this year as you can attend in person or you can still attend online. So if you're bringing your whole team, you'll be like 40% of the conference.
I mean, it's 4 people, the Mac OS team.
Oh, okay. Just the Mac OS team. Well, still percentage wise, you'll be like, 5% of the conference. So it's an interesting statistic. But yeah, I totally
Matt
agree with
has
you.
done.
As someone who speaks at conferences, go ignore my session, right? It's getting recorded. Go talk to people. Don't listen to me. Go talk to people.
Just want to give a shout out to Matt for doing a great job of finding a diverse set of speakers.
Always.
He's
great.
It's not easy, and he puts a lot of work into it and a lot of effort. And I see you, Matt.
Yeah. Matt's great because he's still one of us doing the work, involved in the community, and Mac DevOps is a great conference. Back to the point of sort of the economic squeeze right around now. Yeah, that's going to make DevOps probably difficult for me. I'm debating if I can just swing it on my own. We'll see. But Penn State is also coming up, and that's a drive for me. So that sounds like the one that I can probably sort of sneak off to and spend some time at, which is the opposite of Mac DevOps YVR in that it's huge. It's probably the biggest of the conferences. At I remember when we were in person last time, it was like 550 or 600-ish people. So still a great conference. It's just a very different environment. And also, shout out to the conferences that are, still cognizant that no matter who says the pandemic is over, like we're still in a pandemic. So, I've definitely seen some security conferences saying like, yeah, we're doing this in person and everyone has to wear a mask and prove vaccination status and blah, blah, blah. So, if you don't have one, we'll have a mask for you, all the things. So that's, it's interesting to see how that's going to play out over this year.
Definitely. I also,
right.
I think I plan go to Vancouver. So just because of it's that special.
Yeah. Agreed.
Long flight, but yeah, I think I'm going to do it. Eric, are you coming?
I think so.
Good.
Yeah.
Nice.
And XWorld and DevWorld are running simultaneously at the end of March in Melbourne.
Are you attending that, Eric?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep, I'll be there.
Well done.
Yeah, he'll be there too.
Who will?
Weldon.
Oh yeah, of course. Nice. Yeah. I guess good company trip. And that's also nice because it's a smaller, more tight-knit, generally single track-ish event, if I remember correctly. So it is really special that you get to talk to everyone that you want to talk to and sort of see all the things you want to see. So great. Well, looking forward to seeing everyone at all the events that I can see everyone. And with that, we're at an hour. No one wants to listen to us blather on for more than an hour. So thanks again, everyone, and see you next month.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.